Good morning, afternoon, evening, and welcome to Concerned Citizens Presents, a weekly broadcast on Laguna Woods Village TV. Concerned Citizens is an organization dedicated to peace, social justice, economic equality, and a clean environment. A new year having begun, Concerned Citizens has elected a new slate of officers. To celebrate this event, today's broadcast will begin with a 5-minute video of the installation ceremony. It will be followed by our main attraction, Sally Hubbard's discussion of her new book, Monopoly Sucks. The book argues that the erosion of antitrust law has allowed a few corporations to grow so powerful that they threaten our democracy. Ms. Hubbard is a lawyer who has worked on antitrust in both the private and public sectors. The interview was taped on November 28, 2020 at the Washington, D.C. bookstore, Politics and Prose, from which you may purchase a copy. We hope you enjoy today's program.
Everyone, this is the installation of officers for the concerned citizens of Laguna Woods Village for the year 2021, which we all hope will be a better year for us all. And now, Sue Modell, the program officer, will make some remarks.
Okay, I would like just briefly to introduce the candidates. So I have a little screenshot here that describes everyone, and I will just read who the new officers will be in a short description. So for treasurer, we have Hassan Alif. Hassan has been a member of the Legislative Action Committee and has joined Concerned Citizens in several marches and demonstrations. Then we have recording secretary. We have Alan Feldman. Alan was treasurer for many years and is currently this year recording secretary. So he's simply remaining in the job he already holds. For corresponding secretary, we have Rita Rubinovitz. Rita has been chair of the hospitality committee for many years. You've seen her giving out coffee and cookies at our meetings. In 2019, she was corresponding secretary, and this year she has served as vice president. However, I'm going into that job. I'm Sue Modell, and I have been chair of the program committee for the last several years. And finally, as president, we are very pleased to introduce Wendy Burry, who has been chair of the environmental committee for several years. And this year, she has been our treasurer. Okay, that's the lineup. Joel?
I would like now to administer the oath of office. I'm going to ask you all, I guess, raise your right hand and repeat after I finish the oath. Will you swear to uphold the mission of Concerned Citizens, that is to promote peace, economic and social justice, civil rights, honest government, and environmental protection?
I do.
Congratulations, you are the officers of Concerned Citizens of Laguna Woods Village for 2021.
Hi, everyone. This is Wendy. Thank you all for accepting me as president of this wonderful organization, especially those people who really don't know me. But let me assure you that I am not new to this club. I have been working behind the scenes for several years, as you saw. I've also been on the steering committee and program committee since I started with the club. My executive team, who you just met, and I look forward to working to keep up the standards set by our predecessors. Those people have to be credited for creating and maintaining one of the best clubs in the village. I hope you agree. When we are able to meet again in person, please come up and say hi to me, both those of you who know me and especially those who don't, because I would like to meet you. I hope you had as happy a holiday season as was possible. We have a much better year to which to look forward. So Happy New Year to you all, and thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we will sign off this part of the program.
That said, I have the pleasure of introducing to you our author, Ms. Sally Hubbard. Sally is an antitrust expert and director of enforcement strategy at the Open Markets Institute, an organization developing solutions to America's monopoly crisis. She served as an assistant attorney general in the NYAG, New York Attorney General Antitrust Bureau, and was an investigative journalist covering mergers, monopolies, and privacy. She has testified in the U.S. House of Representatives and before the Federal Trade Commission. She appears and is cited regularly as an antitrust expert in a wide range of media, including the New York Times, CNN, BBC World News, Vanity Fair, Washington Post, The Atlantic, Wired, and she hosts the podcast Women Killing It. Sally, will be joined tonight by Sarah Fryer. Sarah reports on social media companies for Bloomberg News out of San Francisco. Her award-winning features and breaking stories have earned her a reputation as an expert on how Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter make business decisions that affect their future and our society. Sarah is a frequent contributor to Bloomberg Businessweek and Bloomberg Television. She is also the author of No Filter, the Inside Story of Instagram. Without any further ado, Sarah Fryer and Sally Hubbard.
Thank you all so much for joining us at this exciting event. I can't think of a more important time to be talking about antitrust. And I just have to say, you know, this book is very accessible. It's written in a way that anyone can understand it. So it's very appropriate for anyone who's trying to figure out what's actually the power that these monopolies have in our lives, whether it's tech monopolies, healthcare monopolies, and just the damage it can do to the way our society operates. And Sally, I have seen on TV everywhere because we all have questions this year about how exactly these companies are impacting our lives and what is going to happen as regulators start to zero in on their impact and try to figure out what to do if anything can be done. So with that in mind, I want to start by encouraging you again to ask a question in the Q&A. We'll get to those in a few minutes. But first, I want to ask Sally just a really timely one, which is the events of the last week, the way the election turned out, and the process leading up to the election. Where, if you're a person listening today on this event, where can you see the impact of these monopolies affecting our political discourse?
Well, Sarah, first I want to start off by thanking you so much for taking the time to be here with me tonight. And thanks to Politics and Prose for putting this on as well. In the last week with this crazy election we've had, I think the biggest monopoly story is really the disinformation problem. And I think as much as we're all aware that disinformation is running rampant right now, particularly regarding the election results, I don't think we've actually had a reckoning yet in terms of how much disinformation affected people's votes. You know, disinformation has been raging on social media for a long time. We saw this back in 2016. Facebook and YouTube are the companies that I'm most concerned about because of their reach and their business models. And they've had years to work on this problem, but they've only done ineffective Band-Aids. So, you know, we've seen a member of QAnon now, or a person who is affiliated with QAnon is now a member of Congress. Facebook's own internal documents showed that Facebook's algorithms recruit about 64% of members of its extremist groups. So, you know, the fact that these platforms are actually amplifying disinformation and recruiting members to extremist causes, I think is the big story that we still underappreciate. And I think when we're talking about bias, whether there's progressive or a conservative bias, the reality is the bias is in favor of the business model, and that is content that causes people to react. That's more likely to be disinformation than truthful information. Content that makes people click and share and comment, that is what the bias is in favor of. And we're seeing terrible effects on our democracy as a result of that.
Yeah, let's zoom in on that, because that's something that really bothers me, is that people say, oh, Facebook is censoring this group or they're censoring that group. And really, you and I were talking earlier, it's not about the moderation as much as it's about the actual structure of these platforms. Talk a little bit more about that incentive basis. Why do we see Facebook and YouTube become places for lies?
Right. So yeah, in terms of those decisions about what should be censored or what shouldn't be censored, the real problem that we need to look at is the concentrated control over speech. That is the core problem. We cannot have one company determine the winners and losers of what speech reaches 2.3, 2.6 billion. What are we up to now? 2.6 billion users. So it's really
more than 3 billion if you count all of Facebook's properties. And you got to remember, Facebook owns it. This is all over your book, but they own WhatsApp, they own Instagram, they own Facebook Messenger, they own Oculus. We don't live in a virtual world yet, but we might one day.
Yeah.
And so that's more than 3 billion.
Right, more than 3 billion.
The majority of the world's internet connected population.
Right. So, if we've always had rules in America to prevent the concentrated control over speech because we recognized what a threat that was to democracy. We had rules that said you couldn't own the same radio station and TV station in the same town, right? That's all kind of gone out the window in the digital age, and we've allowed these companies to become, monopoly monsters, basically, through not just being the best or offering the best product, but also by acquiring their competitors, by behaving anti-competitively to make sure no one else has a shot. And as a result, we have this very dangerous concentration of power where one company's content moderation decisions actually have influence our elections, right? We can't have one company's decisions affecting the speech that reaches voters at such scale. And then the problem of the business model is that, as you wrote about in your book, Instagram actually had created its algorithm to prioritize content that makes people post more, right? That's how they had programmed their algorithms.
Right.
But Facebook and YouTube program their algorithms to prioritize what makes people react, what makes them click, share, comment, that's called engaging, and I think this is what's most relevant. The reason why they do this is because they want to keep people on the platform as long as possible. The more they keep people on the platform, the more ads they can show them, the more data they can collect about them, and then the more ads they can target at them based on that data. So it's entirely a profit maximizing business decision about what content to prioritize, okay? And it just turns out that middle of the road content, something that's even toned and truthful and not incendiary, doesn't make you scared or angry, isn't gonna make everyone click and share in the way that they do with Hillary Clinton is running a pedophilia ring at a pizza shop, right? So
right. Nobody's sharing the content that says vaccines work totally fine.
Right.
Because that's just common knowledge. And it's the really emotional stories that tend to take over. When you talk about the incentives that these platforms have, I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a second. You're talking about things that are engaging, things that make you react. If I'm Facebook or if I'm YouTube, I am saying, well, hey, that's my signal as an engineer, that somebody somebody is interested in this, that I provided value to their lives. And I think that's what you see with a lot of these monopolies. Indeed, you mentioned this in your book, just how they justify their decisions as positive for consumers. This is what they clicked on. This is what they told me they want to see more of. This is personalization. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, you could feign ignorance about the harm of this programming maybe 5 years ago, but now what we've seen is elections being distorted around the world. We've seen, you know, genocides being facilitated by this business model. So at some point you have to say, wow, we thought this was a good idea, but actually we're causing huge harm. They're not going to voluntarily do that because they're making billions and billions of dollars off of this business model. I mean, Facebook, I think, was $72 billion in earnings last year from this business model. So
Right.
it's not something that they're going to do voluntarily. It needs to be, you know, the people rising up and demanding that government regulates them and that government decreases their power over speech so that whatever their business model is doesn't have such an impact. Whatever bias they may have should not determine, you know, entire elections. You know, like I said, I think the bias is really a bias for disinformation more than any particular worldview. But, you know, we've learned that this is a dangerous business model. They may have done it initially to advertise products to people, but we've seen it's incredibly dangerous. And they just need to do, they need to, we need to, as a society, say it's not okay. We will not allow this anymore.
But are they giving people what they want? I mean, this is what they have been designed to do. If you're a consumer, even beyond Facebook and YouTube, you're saying, I want to buy my products from Amazon because it's convenient, because it's fast, because I think it's the cheapest option. Is that not true?
Well, back to, are they giving, on the content part, are they giving people what they want? I think a good story are these women that I knew had a website, a small media company that was called Women You Should Know. And they actually built their media company with Facebook at its core. And what they did was they shared inspiring stories about women who had done, you know, important things in history and in the present day, you know, as inspirational stories. And at some point they started getting really angry messages from their followers being like, what happened to Women You Should Know? Why did you turn into this company that only sends me, you know, negative, angry stories when I came here for the inspirational stories? And they realized that maybe 1 out of every 20 stories they would write about violence against women or a topic like that. And they realized, when they went back and looked at their data, that the Facebook algorithm was showing those stories to their users more than the stories about the inspiring women, because then that was what was going, you know, they were getting the most reactions out of, right? Someone's raped.
Wow.
Right. So this was not what the consumers wanted. Okay. This is what Facebook wanted. The other thing is, I really think it's preying on our survival instinct, you know, like the most viral things that are causing us fear and anger. That's really just preying on, you know, behavioral characteristics of humanity. I mean, a lot of these business models come from actually studying psychology and B.F. Skinner, and you know, it's troubling. So in terms of, I don't actually think it's what we want. I don't think that what you react or comment on isn't necessarily what you want. So wait, you're asking now about Amazon? Is that we moved on to a different topic?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just say more thing about Facebook before we move on to Amazon, which is that to further your point, I mean, when people comment on something, and we've seen a lot of this in the election discussions, when people comment on something to say that it's wrong or to say that they disagree or and this is why, that actually increases the distribution of the initial post because it gives Facebook a signal that that's engaging content. So again, that would be not what you want. If you're trying to tell your relative that they're believing lies, you don't want those lies to get higher distribution because you took the time to say that.
Before we leave Facebook, actually, one more important point. I was talking before about the recruitment into the extremist groups. You know, the targeting of the ads and the content at individuals is based on all the data points that Facebook has collected about you. often in ways you would never know you're being tracked. Okay, things that you would never consent to if you knew it was happening. It's not just what you post on Facebook. It's what, Facebook has trackers on 85 million websites, where you don't even think you're engaging with Facebook, and it's collecting data about you. And it's that data, that massive data collection about you and billions of other people, that allows the algorithms to actually hyper target you with content that it knows you are susceptible to. And so that's how the recruitment to the extremist groups happens. The algorithms for QAnon, for example, realized that folks who were into anti-vax issues clicked more on the QAnon content. And so that's how they recruit. One of the ways that they recruited so many people so quickly to the QAnon is because the algorithm could see. These were not even people going around saying, I think the Democratic Party is controlled by pedophiles. It's just that they were more susceptible to it. So it's actually targeting people by their vulnerability, based on their surveillance, the surveillance of people. So that is incredibly problematic. And the other aspect is that everyone is getting their own individualized feed. Therefore, we can't actually respond to speech that we don't like, as the First Amendment requires us to do. What's always kept the First Amendment thriving in America is the counter speech doctrine, the idea that the way you respond to bad speech is with more speech instead of censorship. But when you don't see that speech in the first place, because we're all in our own individualized bubbles, it's very difficult to counter it with counter speech. So that's yet another reason why this business model is breaking down democracy. And ordinarily, when we have a business that is toxic or causing problems, we regulate it. And one of the reasons why Facebook is so able to withstand any kind of regulation is because its monopoly power, its tremendous economic power, translates to political power and lobbying power. So that's the last thing I'll say about this Facebook speech issue. But I think we're in a huge crisis for our democracy, and we definitely need to act on it right away.
Because none of us have a shared reality, we can't come to consensus, so we don't know what other people know. That's really good to know about. Biden campaign said yesterday that Facebook is destroying the fabric of our democracy. Do you agree with that? And do you think that a Biden administration will make different moves? What are you expecting? What can we look forward to in 2021 in the anti-monopoly movement?
Right. So I think it is hard to predict what a Biden administration will do. I know a lot of folks want to know. I don't think that the existing investigations that are underway are going to be limited or curbed in any way by a Biden administration. And we're just talking about big tech here. The book, Big Tech has been the hot issue that most affects the election in recent times, but the book talks about all kinds of different monopolies, in terms
including health, right?
Including healthcare. In terms of the ongoing antitrust cases against Google and investigations against the other major tech platforms, I don't think we're going to see any limiting or curbing of them. There's been some thought that maybe he would be more tech friendly. I don't think than the Trump administration, but I do not think we're going back to the Obama years. A lot has changed. When I first started writing about the problems with big tech, and it was 2016, and no one really cared. No one believed me. They thought, why are you complaining about our superstar angel companies? So the public sentiment has really changed since the Obama administration. So I don't think we're going to have a return to that. I don't think we're going to have any kind of a narrowing of what the Trump administration has started. I think we're going to continue on the course, and then also we'll all be supplemented by what the state AGs are doing. We've got 51 state AGs investigating Google right now on a bipartisan basis. So I don't think these efforts are going to be weakened in any way.
Everyone agrees that big tech is a problem, but they disagree about what the problem is. What do you think the problem, if you were to pick one thing on your wish list that you would hope would happen as a result of these investigations and government actions, what would you want?
Yeah, so I definitely want to caution people to think that, I just want to say, don't
There's
think
no cure-all. Like,
there's no single solution. And there's also no single cause, right? The most frustrating thing for me, I have to admit, is whenever I'm posting or sharing articles or, sharing my view that we really need strong anti-monopoly enforcement, people respond, this is not a monopoly problem, we need privacy laws. Oh, this is not a monopoly problem, what we need is interoperability. And my answer to all of that is yes, we need all of these things, okay? This is not an either or situation. There's not only one problem. We need to use all of the tools in the anti-monopoly toolkit. And so the main tools involving big tech are stronger antitrust enforcement against existing anti-competitive behavior and, acquisitions that are anti-competitive, particularly when these tech giants just buy up all the competitive threats. We need to stop that, but also a structural separation where we take away the platform's incentive to prioritize their own businesses and services over those of the companies that depend on their platforms. This is something I call platform privilege, the incentive and ability for these platforms to prioritize their own stuff. And what it means is that anyone competing against these companies that has to use their platform just to go to market is at a completely unfair advantage. So it's a real destruction of the competitive process itself. And the best way to deal with that is actually through structural separation, where you say, okay, Amazon, you're going to be running the platform, and you're not also going to sell on the platform. Or Google, you're going to be the monopoly search engine. You're not also going to control particular type of specialized search things like travel or reviews, right? That's the best way because it doesn't require any kind of ongoing monitoring. It removes the incentive. And it's really just hard to monitor these companies, every little lever that they pull. It's really difficult to use like any kind of a behavioral, they call them behavioral conditions in antitrust law to modify that behavior. So that as an antitrust enforcer, that's former antitrust enforcer, that's what I'm focused on. However, the acronym that I use is PAIN, and that's privacy, antitrust, interoperability, and non-discrimination or neutrality, like net neutrality rules. We could add a T for transparency and make it paint.
to be
Anti-corruption.
Paint them with a brush of accountability.
Yeah.
For those who have joined us more recently, make sure you get those questions in. Sally can take it, whatever you want to ask. She's a pro. So Sally, let's go back to Amazon, because I do think that that's one of the things you talked a lot about your book is it's a complex business. Most people think of it as the place where they get their easy stuff delivered. Explain why Amazon is a monopoly.
Okay. So the first important thing to know about monopoly is the definition of monopoly power is the power to control prices or exclude competition. When we start talking about what is the whole, percentage of the market share, that's actually a form of indirect evidence of monopoly power. Whereas if you can show that a company has excluded competition, that's direct evidence of monopoly power. There's tremendous direct evidence of Amazon excluding competition. When you start looking at market share, what Amazon loves to say is that they have 4% of all retail and that they only have 4% market share. All retail is not, as we call it in antitrust law, the relevant product market. I like to call it the irrelevant product market because it means nothing. When you're determining what the market is, what you look at is what are the substitutes? What are the options? Okay. And so, for Amazon, you've got two different sides of the market, right? You've got the people, the customers who are buying on it, and then you have the third-party sellers and brands that are, selling on the Amazon platform. And it's incredibly clear that for anybody who sells stuff, any company that sells stuff or makes stuff, they basically do not have a choice of not being on Amazon because it accounts for such a tremendous amount of sales volume. When I talk to the third-party sellers on Amazon, they say that they try to put some their products on Walmart or eBay or other marketplaces, but none of them have the volume that can make a business viable, right? So whenever you see that there's not options, that's a good indication that we have control over our market.
What's been funny lately is seeing Facebook try to become an alternative to shopping on Amazon through their Facebook shop tools, and then Amazon trying to become an alternative to Google and Facebook for online advertising. It's like everyone's getting into every market, and the alternatives are not diversifying what businesses can do with their money.
Right. And when you think about it, whenever I hear people say, oh, they're not a monopoly because this other company that's one of the big four is competing against them, that is not the economy we want, where only 4 companies can compete against one another. And the reality is that they all kind of have their little fiefdoms and they just compete around the edges and they don't really go into each other's core markets. Often they have agreements amongst themselves that help each other, keep their monopoly power stronger, as we saw in the Google case that the Department of Justice just brought. Google and Apple have an agreement that, Google paid Apple $12 billion last year to be the default search engine. We have often Google actually amplifies Amazon's monopoly power because it puts Amazon search results first in Google search. So, I don't want an economy when only 4 companies can compete against one another. And often they're really not getting into each other's core markets in any kind of a meaningful way. But back to Amazon with the monopoly power, it just has the power to kick off competitors whenever, it can terminate any marketplace seller whenever it wants to. It can decide it wants to take over a new vertical, a new product. It just, spies on the products that are selling well, then makes its own product based on that data, which it just got sued by the European Commission today for doing.
The Amazon Basics brand.
Right, and then it either as the Amazon Basics brand or as it also sells as a retailer itself, other companies' products. It can prioritize those as well in the search results. And in the prime advertising, it just puts so many thumbs on the scale in favor of its own products. So, what I really want people to understand is that these companies are not so dominant just because they're the best. They're constantly putting thumbs on the scale in favor of their own businesses and distorting the competitive process itself in a way that violates the antitrust laws. So they've been breaking the laws, and it's time for them to be enforced.
Well, on that note, I'm going to start taking some questions. Feel free to keep putting more questions in. I still have questions for you, but I want to get to some of these curious people here. This is interesting. Why do Americans tend to equate freedom with allowing large corporations to do whatever they want versus the EU?
That's a good question. I would like to know that too. To me, when I'm fighting to me, my whole passion and dedicating my life to anti-monopoly is all about preserving democracy. Because I do not think we can have private corporations running over consumers, running over businesses, controlling our markets, controlling the American dream, and deciding who gets to succeed and who doesn't get to succeed. And we are not, they're not democratically elected, right? So I agree that we should be just as worried about concentrated private power as we are about concentrated public power. Even more worried because we don't get to vote for Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, right? I didn't get to vote for those guys. Did you? So if we want to be more free, we need to make sure that our markets are open and functioning so that everyone can have economic liberty, not be squeezed by high prices, not be squeezed by low wages because there's few companies competing to hire them. not be squeezed by ridiculous pharmaceutical prices because the pharma companies are breaking the antitrust laws and keeping competitors off the market. So it really is about freedom for me. Anti-monopoly is about freedom, ensuring that democratically elected representatives are able to create rules that protect us and that we have options. Last point on this is that, the ways that we've always constrained private power from abusing us is through competition and regulation. So if a company abuses you and you have alternatives, you go to those alternatives. It constrains the company from abusing you. If a company is doing something toxic, we regulate them, right? But when we have these monopolies that are too powerful to be regulated, they influence the regulators and they just make end runs around the regulations and don't have competitive constraint, then we're all getting screwed. So that's kind of a major point of my book that I try to make clear is all the ways we're getting screwed every day and are actually having our freedom really taken from us in this monopolized America.
It's actually a perfect transition to the next question, which is, how do you foresee monopolies challenging the distribution of a COVID vaccine, and how do you hope that will be overcome? And I'm also curious about what you said about drug prices and healthcare. Why is it harder to fight COVID in this country because of monopolies?
Right. Yeah. So it's definitely harder to fight COVID because of the monopolization of our healthcare industry. When we have, and so when I was talking about monopolies, I'm often talking about duopolies, which are markets that have two companies, and oligopolies where you have a few companies. These are still not competitive markets. A lot of our healthcare markets are either monopolies or duopolies or oligopolies. And when you have only a few companies, you're still not protected. We really need many more companies in every industry to protect us. But when we saw with COVID, it was crazy, right? You think in the US we have stuff, right? That's the one thing we have is stuff. And then all of a sudden we can't even have enough masks. We don't have enough swabs for tests, okay? These are all problems that my boss at the Open Markets Institute, Barry Lynn, predicted back in 2005 in his book, End of the Line, when he was looking at how the mergers were leading every supply chain to be highly consolidated. Therefore, we're left with, only a few makers of each product, and they're making them, under just-in-time manufacturing, which in case of COVID was not in time at all. So, when we have only two companies in the world that make swabs, that means we can't deal with a pandemic. When we have hospital mergers, the hospital, I think was it like 100 hospital? I'll have to check my stats in my book. I think it's 100 hospital mergers a year, where the main argument in favor of these mergers is, well, it makes them more efficient. They'll save money because they can reduce their beds. And then COVID hits and we don't have enough beds, right? So it's all
not enough doctors on shift. And
yeah, it's all been in the name of efficiency. And the result is that we've become very fragile and very weak and very susceptible to shortages because any little thing on that supply chain that goes off, the whole thing goes out of whack. So, but in terms of how is it going to be distributed by monopolies? I'm sorry, can you repeat the question about the vaccine?
Yeah, how will it affect the distribution of the COVID vaccine? Say the Pfizer one is the only one that is ready in time to distribute, and there's just one company really providing it.
Right. So hopefully we don't allow them to kick other vaccine makers off of the market. I think the bigger problem is going to be with the supplies. I actually have a story in my book about a small business that was making retractable needles, and they were kicked out of the market by a dominant company that only syringes, that they were basically foreclosed from having contracts with hospitals. So I think our bigger problem might be all the bits of equipment that we need to distribute those vaccines, syringes and whatnot. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of patents. I'm not a patent lawyer.
Yeah. Um, what about the cloud market? I think we have a question about that. How the big Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, the market is fractured between those guys, but it still seems like a place where they leverage their power quite heavily.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to, to really understand what the market power looks like in the cloud market, you'd have to break it into kind of like sub markets, because my understanding is that for particular types of customers, there are not a lot of choices depending on business size. I do know that AWS has tremendous market power among certain size businesses, and you have the same problem on Amazon Web Services that you have with Amazon's marketplace, where it's able to actually steal the innovations of the developers that are developing for the cloud platform and then prioritize its own knockoffs. I think it was called strip
They can
mining.
see what businesses are getting popular. It's like Facebook with Onavo, their acquisition, where they were able to see what people were using on their phones.
Right, they can see what's popular, they can steal the innovation, and then they can make it prioritize it on their platform so that it gets preferential treatment. Yeah, the practice, I believe they call it strip mining. When it's Apple doing it to app developers, they call it Sherlocking. There's all these different phrases for customary practices of stealing the innovations of entrepreneurs.
This is a great question, especially for the kind of book that you wrote, which is very focused on what we can do as individuals. This person asks, I want to use my wallet as a facet of my voice. I frequently find things on Amazon, then buy the product on the product website directly, but the price there is 5 to 10% higher. What advice do you have for me as an individual consumer in valuing the abstract benefit and the moral high ground over immediate gratification? Or does the action of me as an individual not really matter in the grand scheme of things?
So what I really encourage everyone to do is to not think of themselves first and foremost as a consumer, but instead to think of themselves as a citizen first and foremost. Your power as a citizen is much greater than your power as a consumer when it comes to monopolies. You stopping to use Amazon, it's probably not going to affect Amazon very much, right? I encourage everyone to stop using Amazon. I think it actually makes your life better. It's good for us to have some friction between buying stuff we don't need, and it's good for us to support our local businesses and
buy books at Powell's.
Yeah, but
yes. Politics and Prose.
Yes, Politics and Prose, exactly. But I really encourage people to think of themselves first and foremost as a citizen. So that means supporting candidates who have anti-monopoly views. It means supporting anti-monopoly reforms. It means looking at every issue that you're concerned about and thinking about what role does monopoly play in it. That's what I try to do in this book, to help you understand all the pain points in your daily life, all of the problems that we can't seem to overcome as a nation. At their core is monopoly power. And it's not that fixing monopoly is a silver bullet that's going to solve all of our problems. Rather, it's that if we don't do this, if we don't deconcentrate economic and political power, we're not going to be able to fix these problems. It's really a foundational issue. We can't build on this kind of faulty structure of monopoly. We can't build a better world on this faulty structure. And so whether it's climate change or equality or, any issue, political issue that you care about, thinking about bringing anti-monopoly as part of the, agenda, as part of the analysis, I think is really critical, as well as, like I said, encouraging the reforms, encouraging, lawmakers like Representative Cicilline in the House, who has taken the bold stance against tech platforms, because we produced a 450-page report. That is incredibly brave, because he's standing up to tens of millions of dollars of monopoly money being thrown at all of his opponents. And so he needs our back. You know, the only way that he can succeed is if he has a movement of people behind him. That is my goal in writing this book, is to help people understand why monopolies make their lives harder every day, and to get them to join in the movement to help, you know, build that support that's needed for these reforms.
It's good to know that we don't have to necessarily stop using these products in order to feel like we're doing our part. You can call your representatives, make your opinions known. This other question is about that report you just mentioned. Do you think the House Antitrust Subcommittee's report, and specifically their statement that structural breakups could be helpful, will have a material effect on the DOJ's investigation or the broader Biden administration?
Oh yeah, I do. I think the report was tremendous. I mean, I did contribute a lot to it, so I was happy that they cited my work and invited me to testify. And you know, the recommendations, policy solutions were what I have been recommending. So I thought it was such a critical step forward to create a blueprint for what both Congress and the agencies can do. I mean, it was directed more towards congressional reforms, but it can certainly influence the remedies that these enforcers seek. You know, structural separation is something that can be sought in an antitrust case, as you know, as we've done in our nation's past, or it could be legislated. You know, so the Glass-Steagall legislation is a model that Representative Cicilline has mentioned. So I think that will move forward. I think, you know, like I said, it can be done in antitrust and litigation, but the faster course would be to do it through legislation, because antitrust cases can take a while.
I just want to ask you one more question about your own interaction with these products. I mean, surely you use Facebook, you use Google, you use Amazon. If you do, you really can't avoid it if you are living in modern society. But how do you reckon with your own consumer choices, especially after doing all this research on these products and what they've done to our world?
Generally, if I can choose not to use a Monopoly product, I do, but that's because it's my career. I don't, you know, this is what I think about all the time. So, but you know, there's so many Monopoly products you just can't avoid. Monsanto controls the world's seeds. You can't avoid, you know, its pesticides in your food. There's a whole chapter about food and what it means for you as an eater, that, you know, every part of the food supply chain, from farmers to grocery stores, are all controlled by monopolies. It limits your choices as someone who eats. We want sustainable food. I mean, organic food with sustainable farming practices. And one of the reasons why that's not available as much as it should be is because of monopolization. So in cases where you can't avoid it, you know, Google has its trackers on most of the web. So I can't avoid Google's trackers unless I want to stop using the internet. I do use the DuckDuckGo search engine. I actually researched my entire book on it. So, I mean, most everything in the book was kind of a cathartic release of everything that was inside of my head, but I did have to find all the sources to back it up. And I use DuckDuckGo for that. I don't shop on Amazon, although other members of my family might still. And I haven't been on Facebook in over a year. I don't use Instagram, but again, I have a teenager, so I can't control that. So I personally don't, but I recognize that it's very, very, very difficult and nearly impossible to avoid most monopolies.
And if you're using another product that's probably built on Amazon's cloud, or it's
Right.
probably using Google advertising or what have you.
Right.
Sally, one last question. How can people get in touch with you if they have more questions? How can they support your book right now? How do we continue the conversation?
You know, I'm always available through probably LinkedIn and Twitter are the easiest ways to connect with me. Email them might just get buried. So I'm on Twitter at Sally Hubbard. I think I'm just Sally Hubbard. Jeez, I should know my handle. And also on LinkedIn, Sally Hubbard. Those are the
Thank
best
you.
ways to connect with me. Oh, I also did create a website, monopoliessuck.com, to try to direct people to different organizations that are working on these issues, all the different causes, all the different allies that we have in the fight, to help them, channel the energy that I hope they get from reading the book to good use.
Well, thank you so much for giving us all this amazing insight. Thank you, and please buy the book, buy it at Politics and Prose, and thank you for coming to this event. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to Politics and Prose. I really appreciate giving attention to this important issue.